What is going on, beasts? Welcome to How to Program Accessories Beginner Edition, and this is for individual and week-long sessions. So this is the third episode of our How to Program series. If you haven't checked out the first two, I would highly suggest you check those out. First episode is all about how to program a Metcon, and the second one is how to program strength specifically for your CrossFit sessions and making sure that you're following that progression. Today, we're going to jump into the accessory edition. Now, accessory, I'd like to say it would be the accessory / skill edition. This is going to be quite a long episode. There's going to be a couple of things that you can jump towards down the bottom, as long as I put them up. And this way, it will just allow you to have a bit more smoother process if you are a little bit ahead of the curve and you know a few more things and just looking at to get some tips or maybe even some inspiration for your workouts and developing them. What we're going to cover today: why perform accessories and skill movements in your training, progressive overload principle. We're not going to cover it in depth too much because we covered it in our strength one, so jump to that one if you really want to learn more about progressive overload and the basic idea of it. Muscle group specific accessories, movement specific accessories, skill specific accessories, there's a lot there, and the basics of programming accessories for beginners. A sample template, as always, of what an accessory program will look like, and then common mistakes that people make when looking at programming or adding accessories into their training. Be sure to like the video, share it with someone who's looking at programming and getting a little bit better at programming, and let's kick into it. Why do accessory / skill movements? Big question, as it is the least important part of our training. Some people might argue it is the most important part, but if we look at our training from our strength to our Metcon, the accessories generally come last, aside from if it's a prehab or rehab movements that are going to help us recover from an injury or an incident. Accessories are there to help fix what isn't exactly on point. Accessories will complement or compensate your movements performed in your regular training. Accessories can help fill holes or build positions that main movements or gymnastic skills leave out. Accessories can be both bodybuilding movements or a skill developer, and implementing the correct accessories and skills at the right intensity and volumes can really help move the needle in your major lifts and your skills, which is really important. Progressive overload. Now, this is the super brief option and brief overview of what progressive overload is, but it's the gradual increase in stress placed upon the body during training. Now, it's important to know because we want to progress our accessories just like we progress our cardio and our strength. If we're not progressing our accessories, are we really improving those smaller and more vital muscle groups that will help develop our bigger lifts? Let's jump into the How to Program Accessories Beginner Guide for CrossFit. That's what you're here for, isn't it? So we're going to firstly cover the muscle group specific accessories. These are your classic bodybuilding movements, things like curls, tricep extensions, lat pull downs. These are the isolation / compound movements that generally use machines or band work to help develop a muscle that's weaker. These will help also build muscle in neglected areas. Now, CrossFit covers most muscle groups and most areas, but what it doesn't cover is isolation. And if what will generally happens with our bigger, more compound movements is we start to prioritize muscle groups more that are stronger, and especially around those heavier weights, whereas we can kind of neglect and leave out some smaller muscle groups. So an example of a accessory movement that is muscle group based is a skull crusher. It's very tricep isolation based movement. Yes, it uses a bit of shoulders, a bit of forearms, but mainly the triceps for there. From there, we're going to move into our movement specific accessories. These are designed to complement a movement either by imitation or compromising the position to develop the main movement. It can be skill work to help develop speed or technique in the main lift, or it can be used to help further develop the main movement, but has a lower stimulus to fatigue ratio. So an example of what I would consider a movement specific accessory, if we look at the deadlift and the deadlift moving pattern, the hip hinge moving pattern, the Romanian deadlift will complement our regular deadlift, as well as the stiff-legged deadlift as well. Two slightly different accessory movements, or secondary lifts, as the powerlifter and strongman community like to call them. But the RDL is essentially a stricter, more controlled, a lighter version of our regular deadlift. And the goal there is obviously to isolate the hamstrings a little bit more, but you're still moving through a deadlift movement pattern. An alternative to a movement-specific accessory is something like a 3-position clean. Depending on how you do your 3-position clean, there's 2 general ways. You can start from the hips, go down to the knees, and then finally finish at the floor. That's probably more an advanced way for people looking at increasing intensity in their clean by starting with the hardest movement and moving to the easiest, whereas a more technical version is starting from the bottom position and moving up. I probably got that wrong. It's probably the opposite way around, but that's okay. You understand the point. So they can be ways that we can use movement-specific accessories to help develop the main mover. The 3-position clean is looking at developing the clean's technique, but also still do it under tension. And with a complex, which is what is usually done quite heavily by the weightlifting community, the Olympic weightlifting community, a complex is a way to hit high intensity lifting without maxing out your actual lift. So if you do like a clean pull, a hang power clean, and then a squat clean, and you're looking at developing your overall squat clean weight, that's a good way to do it without actually hitting those huge numbers and putting your body under a lot of stress. From there, we're going to move into skill-specific accessories, which was, movements and skill-specific are very, very close, but it's an accessory that's designed to improve coordination, accuracy, or balance that will inevitably improve the main lift, main gymnastic movement, etc. So an example of this is the hips to bar technique improver. That's going to help develop the awareness and practice good technique for the bar muscle. Now, the hips to bar is something that I would consider a skill-specific accessory because it doesn't really build muscle or strength in the actual movement. It's not going to get you more volume aside from improving your technique, which that will get you more volume. But doing more hips to bar won't get you more bar muscle ups, aside from the fact that if it's your technique that's the limiting factor, then it will. So they're things that help improve technique and get you more comfortable with the actual movement themselves. But they have very low stimulus to fatigue ratios, which essentially means they're not going to cost you a lot of money when it comes to your training currency, which is super important. Let's get into the bread and butter, the meat and guts, the first part of the video, which is going to be creating the accessories for the program that we've been previously working on in our Metcon and our strength-specific design your program video, how to design your program video. So, once again, we have our little questionnaire. This time it is reduced to 3 questions because we don't need to know so much. We have pretty much a good pestle and mortar, a base for our program, and we're just now adding on to it. And one of the biggest questions that we're going to look at is number 3, which we'll cover in a moment. So keep that in mind when we get up to it. But the first things first is what muscles or movements need to be targeted. So what we can do is look at our workout and look at our strength and make a determination of what things we are working on already and what things have been used quite heavily that we don't need to do. So starting off by looking at our deadlift, obviously 3 sets of 10, 30 deadlifts in total at a moderate weight. Cool. Nothing crazy there to really worry about. We can already kind of think, well, we want to look at improving the muscles that the deadlift uses, hamstrings, glutes, potentially posterior chain, core. These are the kind of things that pop into my head. When we look at the workout, however, we've got running and we've got pulling, especially upper body pulling. So that's another thing that the deadlift can benefit from. Obviously, we use our arms quite heavily in the deadlift. We attach our arms onto the bar for the starters. And secondly, our lats play a huge role in making sure our upper back is nice and flat, nice and stabilized. But we've done tons of pull-ups in the Metcon, so we don't need to add that in. Pretty much you don't need to add any upper body workout in. For a basic athlete, that's going to be covering most of it. So we're looking at more lower body stuff. Of course, the day itself is a pull day and it's a lower body pulling day. So that's what we're going to focus on. What methods are we going to implement? Now, obviously it's going to be up to you. I've chosen for this video a more linear progression because it's nice and simple. Everyone kind of likes linear progressions. You don't have to stick to it. But the other reason why I've also chosen a linear progression is because we have quite a lot of volume in this program that we've pre-created. Look at all the workouts. We've got 20 minutes plus for the amount of work you're going to be doing. Not necessarily hard work, but it is a long period of time, which is a lot of fatigue built up. And the strength work is a lot of volume too, because you've got 30 reps of each movement, big sets. So we want to kind of keep the volume down, but have the weight go up, because there's not a lot of heavy lifting being done in the strength or the workouts. Finally, we're going to hit the last question, which I mentioned was the most important. Based on the current session, is the volume and intensity going to be acceptable? What this means is essentially, this is a question that you answer once you've programmed your accessories. The best way to do this is by feeling, by looking, and by your previous experience. So if you've never done this before, never programmed for yourself before, it's going to be a good learning curve on the first week that you do your own program, because what's going to happen is you might program 2, 3, 4 accessory movements that are all excellent, and it's going to fill in the gaps that you're looking at filling in for that first day. However, when you get to it, you might be fatigued, you might not be feeling 100%, you might not be able to hit the weights or the RPE that you've set yourself for those movements. So adjusting on the fly, there's nothing wrong with that. You might have, for example, walking lunges with 2 dumbbells in your program, but when you get to it, your legs are just smoked and you're like, man, I can't do 22 and a halves for that distance. So you might reduce the weight, the reps, the sets, but you still keep the movement in there because you know you need to work on it. So that's a question you got to ask yourself once programmed, and we'll touch on that once we've looked at what we've put in. So for myself, I'm looking at hinge and hamstring movements, like mentioned, the deadlift, and it's a lower body day. We've gone with the linear progression because we obviously want to progress linearly. It's not even a real word, I just made it up. But essentially, we've got a lot of volume already in the program. I want to put a bit of weight in the accessories. Moving on, lower intensity or lower volume, higher intensity for the accessories. As mentioned, we have a lot of volume in this program. I want to add a bit of weight onto the accessories. So we're going to push the rate of perceived exertion, or the RPE, up a little bit. So the movements that we've hit on for this first session, we've got 3 sets of 10 to 12 barbell hip thrusts and hamstring curls. And here's my reasoning why. So the deadlift obviously is a hinging movement. We're using the hips, but not to their full extent. Mainly, our main muscle groups that are working is our hamstrings. Complementing them is our glutes and posterior chain. And I really want to hammer home the glutes and posterior chain part, so I've added in the barbell hip thrust. It increases the range of motion on the hips and gets the hips really working just in general. And what I always find is barbell hip thrusts over about that 10 rep range are pretty low drag. Like, no matter how screwed you are, you can chuck a bar on your hips and just pump out a few reps. And it's a movement that you're resting on a bench. So really, how hard is it? The accessory 2 is our hamstring curls, 10 to 12 reps, our isolation accessory. So we've got a compound and an isolation. You don't have to have isolation exercises, nor do you have to have compound. It's just going to be whatever is in your head for your program and what works. We've got tons of compound movements in the workouts. I thought adding an isolation one would be nice. Now, let's go back to question 3. Let's say I've done the deadlifts, done the workout. I'm about to start the barbell hip thrusts and I'm absolutely zapped. What I might do in this stage is, instead of doing barbell hip thrusts, I might just do banded glute bridges. So I might take down that intensity a little bit further, but keep the movement that we're looking at hitting, something that's going to hit the glutes and the hips. That's an example of identifying that the current volume and intensity, whether it's going to be acceptable or not. Because like I said, there's no point of writing something down and then just grinding through it, even if it sucks. You're like, oh yes, but it's in the program, I have to do it. You actually don't have to do it. If you've hit your deadlifts, you hit the workout as hard as you can, and you're just melted. You just have no energy left. Either do it in a separate session or lower the intensity, lower the volume, even lower the sets. You might just do one set instead of 10 to 12 reps, 2 sets maybe, even if you feel good. Just make sure that you keep track of it so that next week you know, okay, wow, that really, really hurt. Maybe I'll reduce the overall load or the volume that's in that accessory group so that I'm not just dying and grinding through these sessions. Cool. Now that we've covered that off, let's go and fill in the rest of the days. So look at day 2. We've got shoulder press. We've got the 20-minute AMRAP of handstand push-ups and double unders. So obviously a lot of upper body work, a lot of pressing, a lot of pushing, but it's horizontal pushing. So we're going to complement some of that by looking at working the compromising factors of the body. So with obviously handstand push-ups, with shoulder press, working the front of the shoulders, the rear delts potentially a little bit, triceps. So we want to make sure that the upper back is receiving some attention. We've added the face pulls in there to do that. Now this little accessory piece, the 3 sets with the 15 seconds rest between movements, the 2 minutes rest between sets. This is actually something that I took from Brent Fikowski's Professor Project program. And I really like it because it allows you to A, maintain good intensity in your accessories, but B, it also sets a time domain because accessories can just drag. I don't know about you, but I know me personally, when I'm doing accessory work, I'm just like, sometimes I'm like real zoned in. If there's like, you know, if it's something like this component, I'll be like bang, 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 rest my 2 minutes, have my timer go, get back into it. But like, let's say the first session where it's just 3 sets, 10 and 12, 2 different movements, like I'll take 30 minutes to do that. And that's probably not advisable. So let's move on. So we've got the face pulls to work the upper back, the scaps, make sure that they're getting some attention because when we're working the front of our body, we want to work the back so we're not just getting overdeveloped one side. The banded hollow lat pull downs, an interesting movement, and you might be like scratching your head like, what is that? I've never done that before. You know, why have you added that in? So if we go back to our accessory movements, this is what I would consider a combination between a skill-specific accessory and a movement-specific accessory. So what that is and what that means is the banded hollow lat pull down is going to put you in the position of the hollow hold, but also get the value of lat pull downs from that movement. By keeping that position, you're imitating a handstand position, but on the floor. The lat pull downs is going to really focus on developing the lats, which is good for pressing out for our handstand push-up. And it also imitates our toe to bar technique as well. If you think about our toe to bar, it's essentially a lat pull down with a leg raise. Realistically, but you are the lat pull down. You are hanging lat pull down. You're pulling yourself in, the feet come up, and you touch the bar. So it's going to be like a little bit of a gymnastic accessory that I've thrown in there. I like it because it really enforces that good position. I haven't put an RP on it because depending on your ability as an athlete, I always find hollow holds are hard enough, let alone adding lat pull downs in there. The tricep push down is pretty straight, just forward, pull down, sorry. Yeah, that is essentially just to look at developing the triceps, emphasizing that we've done a lot of pressing that day. Moving on, final one, our third day, which is our front squats. Of course, we've got a lot of volume in this one and a lot of squatting. So I don't really want to add any more squatting into the accessories, but what I have identified is none of the movements in today's workout, which is the day 3, is a unilateral movement. It's not working, you know, one side at a time. It's working both sides. It's a compound movement. And I added the Bulgarian split squats purely to make sure we're isolating one of the legs, because you can generally become pretty dominant in one side, even when we're doing both legs at the same time. The Bulgarian split squat is probably one of the better ways to load weight when you're lunging. It forces you into that good position. And we're also looking at developing the quad and the glutes, and depending on where you're holding the dumbbells, the core as well. So we've got 12 reps per side and 8 RPE. And obviously if you do have a stronger leg, you just keep the same weight from the weaker leg and transfer it over to the stronger leg so that the weaker leg is catching up. And then the sandbag hold, we've got a minute at a challenging weight. I want something that you can achieve a minute at. But while holding that sandbag, we're focusing on developing the posterior chain. Once again, if we're trying to ramble too much, we go back to the movement specific and the muscle group specific. We're looking at developing a movement that compromises the original position. So front squat, we're holding a barbell in front of us. We are working that same kind of area with our sandbag, but this time we're not able to get that nice position with the front squat. We're having to round our back to keep that good hold on the sandbag, and our grips really getting into it. So it's kind of like the same movement, but the opposite way, which is how I like to think about it. So that day itself, I've actually added in the number 3, a moderate intensity rather than a high intensity, purely because front squats, air squats, burpees, bike, the EMOM itself is pretty intense. The strength is pretty intense. I find front squats pretty intense. So we've kept it a little bit easier on the actual accessory work themselves. So when we look at week 1 to week 2 of the same program, all we're really progressing on the week 2 side is the RPE for the hip thrusts, the hamstring curls, face pulls, tricep pull downs, Bulgarian split squats. So anything that has weight in it or a resistance, we're looking at improving that. I haven't added anything different for the banded hollow lat pull downs. Once again, they can be quite tricky for a lot of people. So even just doing them will be hard enough on their own. And the sandbag, I've increased the time by 15 seconds. There's no need to increase the weight necessarily after week 1, because you might not have that many variations of a sandbag. And even if you don't have a sandbag, you might use something like a kettlebell. I find it quite hard to get multiple different weights for a sandbag. So instead of increasing the weight, we can increase the time, which is still progressively overloading that movement. Moving on to the most important part of the video, common mistakes. I've already harped on it. I won't harp on it too much more. Grinding through accessories is probably one of the biggest mistakes people make. Like they program themselves accessories and then they grind through it. I've been there. I've done it to myself hundreds of times. It's not worth it. What is better is either doing them in separate session or reducing the volume, intensity, or even the complexity of the movement. So once again, the example, barbell hip thrusts, you might get there and you might be absolutely zapped. You might physically not be able to push that kind of weight. Reduce it from a barbell hip thrust to a banded glute bridge or even a glute bridge raiser. And even if that's too much, just a bodyweight glute bridge is better than nothing. Programming movements that have too much stimulus to fatigue ratio. An example of this, we've done deadlifts. We did Diane as an example, which is deadlifts and handstand push-ups. And then guess what your accessory is? Romanian deadlifts or sumo deadlifts. Like, you're just going to kill yourself. If we have a hard session and a hard strength movement, program an easy accessory or something that's at least low tax, low drag, low volume. Something like curls, something like even something like a hamstring curl is pretty low drag when it comes to the fatigue that your body is going to feel. Yeah, your hamstrings aren't probably going to feel too great, but at least the rest of your body will recover enough so that, like, let's say, for example, day 2 is your day 2 strict press and the handstand push-up double under workout. It's not really going to affect tomorrow. Keeping in mind as well, deadlifts have a massive stimulus to fatigue ratio. I know that I spoke about it in my previous strength video. Probably not really that wise to program deadlifts 2 times in a week as a strength movement, aside from speed or technique work. Keep that in mind when looking at programming strength. Finally, not utilizing progressive overload in people's accessories. So you've got an accessory, you've got hamstring curls, you do the same weight 3, 4, 5 weeks in a row, same repetitions, same sets. You'll get used to that weight very quickly. And even if you get used to that weight and then like, okay, now I'm going up, that's okay. That's a long-term form of progression. And you're kind of getting used to the volume. It's like flat loading. It's kind of what flat loading is all about, is doing similar weights and rep ranges, but only making minute increases of either the sets, the reps, or the intensity. But with no progression, you're not going to get any better at the movement. You're just going to get used to the movement. We don't want to adapt to it. We want to put our body in positions where it's not quite comfortable with doing that specific movement. So making sure that we are progressing our accessory in some way, whether it's by adding a tempo, whether it's by adding more weight, whether it's by adding more sets, more reps, plenty of different ways to progress. Just get creative with it and try and do things that you're not used to. That would be my biggest advice for you. Apart from that, guys, that is the episode. How to program accessories for beginners. This is an individual session in a week span of sessions. That is going to cover episode 1, 2, and 3. Episode 4, 5, and 6, we're going to look at the mesocycle. Now, I don't know when these videos are going to be out, but I'll definitely try and get them out as quick as possible. I've been doing a range of things. This is the first YouTube video I've made in a while. I've been popping out reels, as you've probably seen, and if you want to check out more of my stuff that does come out more regularly, I'm a lot more active on my Instagram and YouTube stories, so be sure to check out at Tyler J. Hamilton for any Instagram content. Subscribe to the channel if you found this video helpful. I'm going to leave some of the templates on a post that I put up on my website, absolutebeast.org, and check out my programs while you're there. I've got some specifics programs that are going to help develop those skills that you either have some or none of. As always, you guys at home, be sure that you stay a beast.